Hey guys, so today we're going to be doing my review for Fantasy Island. Now this is definitely one of those movies that I would go and see and then later find out that they're not really a horror, so then I would just end up not reviewing them but maybe mentioning them in an end of year review. But I have made a goal for myself to review as many movies as possible. I don't know if you've caught on to that, but I have reviewed almost every movie actually that's come out in theaters near me. So even if they're not technically horror, I do still want to talk about them. The one exception to this, and I hope you guys are okay with this, don't hate me, I don't want to go see Brahms the Boy 2. I'm not gonna review it, I'm sorry. I think that's gonna be the one movie I give myself a pass on because I just can't bring myself to do it. Normally, I don't let media or trailers sway me too much one way or the other. I wasn't really a fan of the original The Boy. This one I have zero interest in seeing, so I'm not gonna be reviewing it, but I will talk about it in my end of year review, so I will watch it eventually and talk about it. Anyway, let's talk about Fantasy Island. Now this is one that was definitely marketed more as a horror, and after seeing it, it's pretty much not a horror. Like, there's horror elements in it, which we'll get to, but generally I don't see this as a straight up horror movie. And I said that it's marketed as a horror, and I don't think the marketing is that far off from the movie, but I do think that the trailers made it look much more horrifying than it actually was. Also, my cat's gonna be making some noise here for a second. Also, it's produced by Blumhouse. It is produced by Blumhouse, which generally they make a lot of mainstream horror movies like Get Out and Insidious. However, they also make a lot of movies that are kind of similar in tone to Fantasy Island, such as Happy Death Day and Split, where it's a little bit more of a thriller movie than horror. So one thing that I actually had a conversation about with my friend before we went in to see this movie is how a lot of companies are marketing their movies as more mainstream horror than they actually are. And then when the general public goes to see these movies, they're not scary, they see it as not scary, they deem it as bad horror, when in reality it's just kind of marketed poorly. And one example of this, I would say, is the ever so controversial movie Gretel and Hansel. Now, I was already excited for this movie, but I do think that the marketing for it made it seem a little bit more of your mainstream horror type of movie instead of what it actually was, which was an artsy art film with a little bit of horror sprinkled in there. I think the general audience had an opposite reaction, whereas I was relieved to see it was an art film, more artistic than horror. Many people probably saw this, well, I know a lot of people saw this and thought it was bad horror because it wasn't scary or it was too artsy for them because it was marketed a different way. And I think this is partially due to the fact that horror is becoming a more popular genre at this point, but it in turn can hurt them and their ratings depending on their audience. I'm not sure if Fantasy Island does this exactly, but I definitely was expecting more horror elements than I actually got in the movie based on the trailers. And it's listed on IMDb as adventure comedy horror. And that's definitely one way to describe it, I suppose. So Fantasy Island is based on a 70s TV show about a magical resort and follows a group of people who want a trip to Fantasy Island, where each guest is allowed one fantasy and they must see it out no matter what direction it takes. Obviously, some of their fantasies aren't what they expected and chaos ensues. So this movie was originally meant to be an R-rated movie, and Jason Blum had said that he thought he filmed an R-rated movie, but after test screenings, they realized if they edited out a couple things, then they could make it a PG-13 movie, which is better in the box office generally. Not necessarily amongst horror fans, but box office money-wise, it does better because more people can see it. I don't really pay attention that much to ratings. I didn't even know this was a PG-13 rating. A lot of my favorite movies of all time are PG-13 movies. I did a whole video on PG-13 movies if you want to take a look over there and see my favorites. And I don't necessarily think movies need gratuitous gore to make it better and to make it an R-rated film. Not all movies need that. However, this movie might have needed that. If they added a little bit more gore and horror elements, made it R-rated, I think it could have overall been a better film. So there will be a more edgier cut that's released later on in the year, which will show all the deleted scenes that they cut out to make it a PG-13 movie. I don't think it's going to be that extreme or that many things because there was only a few things that they had to edit out. So I don't think it's gonna, it didn't change the plot drastically by editing those things out. I do really like how they approached the different fantasies in this movie. Each one kind of felt like its own movie or short film because they were like edited differently to be almost different genres. However, this did kind of make it feel a little messy and convoluted, and you know how I feel about a convoluted plot with too many characters. So this film is described as Westworld meets Cabin in the Woods, where contestants live out their dreams but are trapped in a horrific nightmare. I think that gives this movie a little too much credit because it's definitely not executed as well as those two movies. Like I said, this is part comedy film. Wasn't a fan. I'm generally not a fan of comedy in movies. It really depends. I'm kind of picky about it, and I don't really have like set preferences. It just kind of depends on the movie. I did feel like they were trying way too hard at so many different points in time to like ease the tension, but the thing is, if you want the horror elements, you need tension. So they kept diffusing it at the wrong point in time where we needed the suspense, we needed the tension to give us that horror feeling. So the comedy really did take away from this movie for me. That being said, it would be a great beginning horror thriller movie. I know there's a community of people that watch my videos that don't watch horror movies, if you can believe that. You guys are the real MVPs, just sitting here supporting me, not even knowing really what I'm talking about for certain horror movies. But this is a movie for you guys, so if you're watching and you don't typically watch horror movies, try Fantasy Island. It's not that scary. So the acting in this was definitely also a miss for me. I've generally not been a fan of anything that the Pretty Little Liars cast have done after, like the Possession of Hannah Grace, Spring Breakers, Martyrs remake. They're just not for me. And this one's kind of included, I guess. This is the better one out of all those movies, but actually I can't say it was better than Martyrs remake, but I just love the original Martyrs so much that I didn't like the remake, so I was entertained by this movie, I will say that, and there were a lot of plot points that I actually wasn't expecting. I was worried when I saw the trailers that they had actually spoiled some plot points that were supposed to be in the movie, but there is actually a lot more to it than what is in the trailer, so that was a nice surprise. Overall, I give this movie a 6 out of 10. I could see myself rewatching it, but overall I did feel like it was a little messy and disjointed. It was a fun movie, like it was a fun ride, but just a messy story. So I do want to get into spoilers because the ending was definitely the worst part of this movie, and I am so tired of saying that I enjoyed the first 3/4 of the movie more than the ending. When are we gonna get a good ending in a movie? Like anytime this year, that'd be great. Well, Underwater had a good ending. That was good. Anyway, so we're on to spoilers now. Please click off if you don't want to know what happens, but I'm not recommending you see it, so wait for DVD. Okay, so the movie progresses and the characters soon find out that they are not just living out their own fantasies, they are actually living someone else's. I kind of thought that the fantasies would start to overlap because they're all on the same island, but it became so much more than that. So it turns out that they're all kind of connected to this one person's death, and they're in this fantasy that will bring him back to life. So they're all slightly responsible, so it is a revenge story, and the fantasy that they're in is actually Lucy Hale's character's fantasy, which I wasn't a fan of because, no offense, she couldn't pull off that kind of range. She went from being this flirty girl to bullied girl to I don't even know girl, and then she was like this badass chick that like is seeking revenge for this guy. She had many stages of her story in this movie, and I'm not a huge fan of her acting. I feel bad saying that. I'm a fan of Pretty Little Liars and all, but the acting in that show is just so over the top. It just wasn't believable, and the whole reason why she wanted this character's Nick to be back alive is because she went on one date with him and felt chemistry. One date. And there's even a comedy bit about the fact that she only went on one date with him and yet is going through this giant fantasy where all these people are going to be murdered because they're slightly responsible for his death. And don't even get me started with how the island works and how they actually defeat her, because they kind of do. Yeah, they do. It's really lame, and basically that's what I mean when I say it's messy. It's all over the place. It's just lame. Like the ending just fizzles out. It's just bad. And obviously nothing within this movie is realistic, and that's fine, but I just don't even believe in this fantasy world on this fantasy island that what happens in the end of this movie would actually happen in this fantasy world. It did have some good parts. It was a fun movie, but I don't know if fun is the best adjective that you want to give to a horror movie, but that's just me. I was expecting a cheesy movie. I kind of got that. Some things were unexpected, and that was, you know, nice to see. It was fun, but not horror, not really that scary. And yeah, those are my thoughts on Fantasy Island. If you've seen it, please let me know your thoughts down below. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.